Hi, everyone. I think we're recording now. Uh, Welcome back. Thank you for watching again. Today, we're going to talk about job analysis. And this is going to be the first specific IO topic that we're going to get into. Even more specifically, it's our first I side or industrial side topic. If you remember back to the IO lecture um, just previous to this, we talked about the industrial side being about efficiency and productivity, and the O side, the organizational side, being about employee well-being. The next several lectures are going to talk about the I side, or productivity, and it all starts with the job analysis. That's our fundamental bread and butter. So when I talk about job analysis, we're going to, just to actually give you a preview of where we're going, when I talk about job analysis, it's the first major thing, because the next few things we'll talk about build on this. We need to do a job analysis, and we'll talk about what that is, before we can select employees or before we can see how employees are doing at their job. So job analysis is basically figuring out what a job actually entails. I gave the example earlier. Sometimes we read a job description and the job actually isn't like that at all. And that's always sort of disheartening or problematic if we're the one doing that job. IO psychologists do job analysis more than anything else to set the stage, to have a proper description of the job and to set the stage for all these other I side things we do, like selecting employees or appraising their performance. So today's lecture is going to focus on this fundamental building block of IO psychology. We joke with our grad students, when in doubt, the answer is always job analysis. So if we ask them a question and they think, I'm not quite sure what it is, job analysis, even if it's not correct, is probably not a bad fallback option because it is that fundamental to IO psychology. So I know upfront it sounds maybe not terribly exciting, figure out what a job is, well, la-di frickin' da. But what we'll do today is hopefully make it more interesting. We'll talk about what it is, why we do it, how we do it, and some other sort of subtopics in there. One thing I want to highlight for all of you is a lot of these lectures, especially at first, are going to be basically a series of lists that I talk about in greater detail. So, for example, I'll list off different purposes of job analysis and go through a bunch of different reasons why we need to do this. And the reason I tell you this now is as you think about, and I know we just started, but as you think about taking tests and things like that, and just sort of how I organize information in my head, I think about it in sort of these different categories of what is this thing, why do we do it, how do we do it? And hopefully if you have that sort of framework in your brain, you can start filling in as we go along today. So without further ado, normally we do this activity and I'll talk this out as we go. Hypothetically, you all have been now in college for 3 to 4 years or more, which means you've had a lot of different classes with a lot of different professors. Some of these classes, you may have thought, oh, this professor did a really great job. Some of them, hopefully not too many, you might have thought, they kind of sucked. Let's unpack that though. Let's talk about what it is a professor's job is, because I think it's something that as students, you guys don't think about a whole lot. I mean, we're here to help you out and you don't see some of the other pieces. And so we'll do kind of a mock job analysis for a professor. Let's start off, there's 2 different ways to do job analyses. And we'll talk about these different ways later on, but broadly, you can do a task-based or knowledge, skills, abilities, and others-based approach. Another way to think about this is you can do a job analysis that is work-focused, what do they do, or worker-focused, what about them makes them good at their job. So as we're going along, start filling these lists in your own head. What do professors do? Well, one major thing we do is teach, right? That's kind of a broad umbrella category. We teach you all material that will hopefully be useful to you later in life. Hopefully, well, most of it. Now, within that, there's a lot of different components. What goes into teaching? Well, we prepare lectures. Even to start out, we read a lot, we learn a lot to know what we're talking about most of the time. We prepare lectures. We deliver lectures online or face-to-face. We facilitate discussions. But even beyond that, we create assignments. We grade assignments. Same with tests. Respond to emails. And probably a few other things that I'm forgetting, but under that one broad umbrella of teaching, those are some tasks. Now, in addition to teaching, we're also expected to do research. So we're expected to publish in journals to advance the science of whatever it is we do. And in this case, it's iopsychology. So research means you come up with questions, read the literature, collect data, analyze data, write it up, respond to revisions, and so on and so forth. It can mean giving talks at conferences or at other schools. And this is another component of our job. And finally, we have to do service. So service, another broad umbrella, it means we advise students. We serve on committees within the department or at the college or university level to do different things. Now, for example, this year I was serving on our department's real committee implementation team, where we spent lots and lots and lots of hours talking about how to adapt our curriculum to the real model. That's not a completely exhaustive list. I don't want to bore you all or sound like I'm complaining. That's just, kind of a list of tasks that professors do. Just by doing that, we've done like a really bare bones job analysis. We've listed out what would be in a job description, for example, for hiring a new professor. The other approach is the worker-oriented one, where we look at the knowledge, skills, ability, and other of a professor. So knowledge, I'll go through this one a little more quickly, but knowledge is, you need to know about, for me, it's like know about psychology, obviously. Know about statistics. Know about pedagogy, how to teach, and other stuff. Skills, I need to be skillful in things like, I need to know things like Microsoft PowerPoint, Word, Zoom, D2L, God knows what else for online classes that I haven't figured out yet. But there's skills involved there. And plus, like, I need to know how to use statistics software and how to write papers and communicate orally, blah, 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 blah. Ability. Abilities and skills sometimes run together, but I need to be able to do some of the tasks, able to do research, able to communicate effectively, able to form relationships with colleagues and with students to make sure everything goes well. And then other is kind of this weird catch-all things. Oftentimes, and I'd invite you all to think about professors that you had that were really, really good. What stood out about them? Maybe it's because they really cared about every student. Maybe it's because they were really charismatic and got everyone super engaged. Those are the two examples that are most often given. And these are things that aren't knowledge, skills, abilities, but they're just kind of this other piece that makes people especially effective. So, briefly, we've done two different types of job analyses, a task-based one and a worker-based one, or a work and worker-based job analysis. Now that we've done that, let's kind of dive into the weeds here. What is job analysis sort of formally defined? It's a family of methods for describing jobs and human attributes necessary for a job. Now, the thing is, and this is what separates an actual job analysis from what we just did, an actual job analysis has to be systematic. What do I mean by that? I mean, you have to have a method to follow of how you're going to do it before you do it. It's almost like conducting a research study. You have to break a job into smaller units. So, I sort of described, we have teaching, research, and service. You have to break that down even further. And a true job analysis has to result in some sort of written product. So a lot of times there's some IO-psychology consulting companies that just do job analysis. They go to place to place to place and rewrite job descriptions for people. One of our recent graduate program projects was writing job descriptions for the city of Roanoke. They needed to update their job descriptions for reasons we'll talk about in a bit. And they had our grad students come in and do a job analysis. They interviewed people, watched people, and came up with the final report. They also did a job analysis at Brickhouse Pizza, which I think was probably more fun because there's pizza and beer there. Okay, as I had said just a few minutes ago, there's two major approaches: work-oriented and worker-oriented, or task or person-oriented. Again, though, the work-oriented is what are the tasks that are required for the job. The worker-oriented is what's required of the person for the job. And at this point, I hope you can start to see how this is kind of a necessary foundation for selecting people for a job. You have to know what kind of person you want and what they have to do. And it's also critical for performance appraisal. In order to tell if someone's doing a good or a bad job, you have to really understand what their job is. You may even be taking this a step further and thinking about some jobs that you've had. Some jobs where people really knew what you were supposed to be doing. You were told to do it, you were allowed to do it, it went great. Those are jobs that probably had at least a basic job analysis. You may have also had jobs where nobody knew what you were supposed to be doing and you were never quite sure, so you never felt like you were doing a great job, or you just weren't very happy because you weren't sure what was going on. That's a job that may not have had a job analysis. So when we do these, we break these down into levels of specificity. We break jobs down from job title, broadly, you're a police officer, to position, you're police officer number 3 on the night shift. To duties, broadly, you need to enforce the law. But within that, there's tasks. So within enforcing the law, you investigate crimes, you arrest suspects who violate the law, you testify in court, all that. Tasks can be broken down to activities that are even more specific, and finally to elements that are kind of like the most granular you can get. With a worker-oriented job analysis, we have to provide a description of the KSAOs necessary for a person to do the job well. And I keep rubbing my nose because I think I have cat hair all over the place. In fact, I'm 100% sure that I have cat hair everywhere right now, and it's driving me insane. Sorry. With a worker-oriented job analysis, we look at the KSAOs: knowledge, how to do a task, capability, skill, ability to do a task, ability, capability, or potential to do a task. I realized I didn't blow this up. I'm sorry, let's keep going. And other attributes needed. So knowledge is just, do you know something or how to do something? Skill is, are you physically or mentally able to do it? So if I'm working at a shipping facility, I need to have the skill to physically lift boxes above my head to put them on a conveyor belt. Ability is a little tricky. It's the capability to learn. So you might not know how to do something. You might not know how to operate heavy machinery, for example. But if you are able to learn it, then you have that ability. And then for the professor example, we talked about like charisma and caring. If you work in a bank, one other characteristic they're really going to want is integrity or honesty. If you work in law enforcement, they're really going to want you to have integrity as well, but also have courage. So certain jobs require things that don't fall neatly into knowledge, skill, or ability, but are worth mentioning because they are so critical. So this table here just provides a couple examples for different professions at a broad level. If you're a lawyer, you need to know about the Constitution. You need to have the skill to write clearly, the ability to communicate, and you got to be able to work long hours. You hear horror stories about people that go to law school and then start out and they work, 60, 80-hour weeks, and that's just par for the course. You don't want to do that. Being a lawyer may not be for you. Sorry to burst anyone's bubble right there. For a nurse, so my little sister is a nurse in Chicago right now, and she needs to know about different surgical procedures, even if she's not doing them, so that she knows what issues may come up. She knows how to draw blood. That's a skill that you kind of do fairly often. Needs to have the ability to remain calm in a crisis. If someone codes and is having serious distress, she needs to be able to stay calm. And another ability, this is kind of a weird one, but we're going to go with it. She can't be squeamish at the sight of blood or any other bodily fluids. More than anything else that I hear from her is just the amount and range of bodily fluids she deals with on a daily basis, and it's super gross. So I would not have been cut out to be a nurse. Plumber, teacher, you guys I don't need to walk through all of these, but hopefully you get the idea that you can classify a job by the knowledge, skill, ability, and other of the people doing it. Each job has different requirements depending on what it is. So that's what job analysis is. Now let's talk about why we do it. We do job analysis for actually a variety of reasons. One is career development. So if you think back to maybe elementary or middle school, if you ever took a vocational test where you wrote out all of your interests and they said, you might want to become a whatever, a lawyer or a nurse or a teacher. Job analysis is done not primarily for this, but it's used to help with vocational counseling, where people may not know what they want to do. And if you have a library full of jobs that you can look at, you can maybe direct people based on their KSAOs, based on the job tasks, etc. I still somehow remember my vocational test said that I should have been a park ranger or a forest ranger as a 5th grade. And if this whole professor thing doesn't really work out, still on the table. I don't think it'd be a bad life. We need job analysis for competency systems. This is back to the performance appraisal idea. If you're going to rate people on how well they're doing their job, you need to understand what their job is. You can't just say, oh, we kind of like you or we don't, so we're going to rate you well or not. Instead, sorry, I have cats now running around fighting. That's fantastic. You got to know what the job is. If you have a job analysis done, you can actually rate someone based on what they're supposed to be doing rather than what you think they're supposed to be doing. And that's a really important distinction. Job analysis is also the key for legal defensibility for hiring or firing. If you fire someone, you have to justify it, right? Or if you hire someone, sometimes you have to justify that too. And the best way to do it is to say, this person has or doesn't have the KSAOs needed to do the job. Or this person is able to do these tasks or not. If you're working for a company and the company's ever sued for discrimination or anything like that, you have to be able to have a job analysis to fall back on to say, well, this person got fired because they couldn't do the job. They couldn't handle the sight of blood. They couldn't lift a box over their head to put on a conveyor belt. Whatever it may be, you want to be able to defend it. And job analysis is the backbone of that. Performance appraisal ties into competency modeling. A job analysis can also tell us beyond what the job requires, it can tell us what good and bad performance is. That way, when we rate employees, we can say, hey, this is what we told you good performance is, and looks like you did it or you didn't. And we do that by, this is kind of a segue, we do that through critical incident techniques. A critical incidents technique is where we as IO psychologists often go in and talk to people in the field who are working there, and we ask, like, tell me about a time somebody was really good or really bad at the job. And that way we can start filling out sort of a library of examples of someone doing well or someone not. We kind of started this off today talking about the professor example and saying, give me an example of someone that did a great job or someone that didn't do a good job. Just as a fun aside, the critical incidents technique came from selecting flight candidates during World War II. So back in World War II, planes were still pretty new, and there was no rigorous selection system in place. The result of that, so people were told they could be pilots or they couldn't be pilots because they lacked inherent flying ability. And so people that might have been good weren't allowed to try. And then moreover, people that were not really cut out for it were put in planes and killed in training, or usually in training. So IO psychologists came to the flight schools and actually did this critical incidents technique where they said, tell me about times where someone did good or bad, and then used that to end up selecting pilots based off what actually worked rather than what people thought worked. So that's kind of all this. The end result, so they had 150 psychologists and 1,400 research assistants for this. And they saved a lot of lives because they put people in planes that were qualified to be in planes. And they saved a lot of money. Kind of on the more morbid note, if a lot of your trainees are dying and they're crashing planes, you're losing a lot of money. Okay, we've already gone through a bunch of a bunch of purposes of job analysis. Here's some more that we'll go over kind of briefly. Selection, and we're actually going to talk about that in a couple days, is who should be hired. To figure out who you should hire, you need to figure out what kind of person you need. Sometimes, though, we hire people knowing they don't know everything they need to, and that's where training comes in. We could hire someone knowing that they may not know everything, but we can identify from the job analysis what they need to be trained on so they can do the job. We're back to vocational counseling. That's kind of like the career development of what do you want to do. Some people do job analyses for research purposes. And then there's job classification, description, and design, where we use job analysis to say this job is, in this, entry level or middle level or higher level based on the complexity. Okay, so we've talked about what job analysis is, the purposes of it, and next we'll talk about sources of job analysis information. Who provides it? Well, subject matter experts often provide job analysis information. These are people that are incumbents that are currently doing the job, or supervisors of people doing the job, and ideally we get both. The way we do this is we go in to an organization, we talk to people that are doing the job, we talk to their supervisors, and we say, what do you think the tasks are? How often do you think you do this task? How important is this task? And then what are the KSAOs? And we don't just interview one person, we interview hopefully a lot of people to get sort of like this overall picture from the people that do it. That's kind of the best bet. Sometimes people that do job analysis as their main thing can provide job analysis information because they've done so many. And sometimes if we can't necessarily talk to SMEs or subject matter experts, we come in as trained observers to watch people doing the job in order to collect this information. So how do we do it? We've talked about now the who, the how. We can actually do the job, or try to do the job. I have an advisor from grad school who worked for the Army Research Institute back in the 70s or 80s. And he was doing a job analysis on tank drivers. What did he do to figure out what they needed to do? He got to drive a tank, which seems really cool, and I think I might actually be in the wrong job. If you can't actually do the job, though, you can observe employees, interview SMEs, or just survey SMEs using questionnaires. None of these are perfect, right? You miss something with all of these. So ideally, you're using a combination of these methods in order to get a full picture of the job. And well, we're not going to spend tons and tons of time on this, but there's some established methods for this beyond just going in and doing what I've said. There's the job components inventory. This is KSAO based, and you're basically rating 400 features of jobs in 5 components. Use of tools and equipment. Do you need to have perceptual or physical requirements? Mathematics, communication, or decision-making and responsibility. Those are the 5 major categories, and basically people rate, do you need to do this or not? Do you need to use a hammer or not? Do you need to be able to lift X amount of weight or not? Do you need to do mental math? And so on and so forth. A functional job analysis relies on existing job analyses and sometimes combining existing job analyses to form what you're looking at. And this, the most common thing, it started off as the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. Now it's called ONET. And ONET is super, super cool. It's an online database where you can look up jobs in order to see what the tasks and KSAOs are. So I'm going to jump out of PowerPoint briefly and go over to my browser. Let's see here, can I zoom in? I can zoom in. I pulled up an ONET entry for basically a psychology professor. And what it gives is a brief description, teach courses in psychology, blah, 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 blah. Sample reported job titles, adjunct instructor, assistant professor, associate professor, faculty member, blah, blah. Then it gives tasks. Prepare and deliver lectures, initiate, facilitate, and moderate classroom discussions, evaluate, grade students' work, lab assignments, etc. And it says only 5 of 24 displayed, so there's actually a lot more in here. Beyond listing just the tasks, they have knowledge. Psychology, English language, education and training, mathematics, skills, learning strategies, instructing, reading comprehension, speaking, active listening, abilities, oral expression, written comprehension, blah, blah, blah. And then they even go so far as to talk about work activities, detailed work activities, work context, the job zone. So this is job zone 5, extensive preparation needed, related experience, job training, education, credentials, work styles, work values, related occupations, wages and trends. It's very comprehensive. Industrial organizational psychologist is also in here, and it has a slightly different list of skills and everything. I would recommend checking this out. Just if you get a chance, think of a job that you want to do at some point in your life. It could be right out of college. It could be something you want to work to. Look it up on ONET, which is just onetonline.org, or just Google ONET and it'll bring you there. And check it out. I think it's kind of neat to see everything that's out there and what you could possibly do. You can also go to find occupations and see what has a bright outlook. Rapid growth. You could be an actuary. That would be great. An animal scientist. A billing and posting clerk. Okay, so you can do lots of different things. We're gonna keep on moving, but give that website a look-see. It's oddly one of those things like Wikipedia where you go to look up one thing and then you find yourself going down a rabbit hole, and 4 hours later you kind of look up and you wonder what the hell just happened. Or maybe that's just me. It's probably just me. All right, methods of job analysis. We have the position analysis questionnaire. This measures KSAOs. And then we have combination job analysis methods that look at tasks and KSAOs. And that tends to actually be really good because it gets you a more well-rounded look at both the job and the person doing the job. So ultimately what you end up doing depends on what the job is, but also the cost and time that you have. If you're being paid for your time and you have lots of time available, you'd interview SMEs, you'd watch people do the job, you'd do task and KSAOs. Sometimes that's not possible, so you kind of adapt to the situation. And more people are doing job analyses emphasizing teamwork or work teams. How well do you work with others, not just interpersonally, but now with so much work online? How well do you communicate with others through virtual methods like Zoom or Slack or other messaging apps? How well do you collaborate on documents online? How well, all these other things are starting to become important when people are working remote. The good news is our existing methods of job analysis tend to both be pretty reliable and pretty valid. And remember, that basically means that they're consistent. Different job analysts agree on what the job is, and job analyses done look similar over time. That's the inter-rater and test-retest reliability. And job analyses relate to things we care about. They're valid. So long story short, we do these, and not to toot our own horn too much, but we do them pretty well. And a lot of work has gone in over the years to making job analyses work well. Okay, now we're gonna hit a couple small topics to wrap up. The main things we've talked about, just to remind you, are what job analysis is, what the purposes of it are, who does it, and how do we do it. Now we get to things like job evaluation, which is basically taking a job analysis, but it's putting numbers on it in terms of the complexity or amount of skill needed to do things. So a job evaluation might say filing papers, that gets a 1. That's not very complex. Mixing chemicals to make chemistry things, that's more complex. That's a 6. The last time I took chemistry was in high school, and I did very, very poorly. So that's as far as that example is going. And to do a job evaluation is really done to identify what a job is worth monetarily, not like what the human being is worth or anything like that. That would be terrible. It's just to identify what a job is worth. The government does this a lot. The federal government has GS or pay grades, 1 to 15, I think, or 16. And jobs that are low grade are more like administrative assistant jobs that don't require much training or decision-making or responsibility. Higher level jobs require a lot of leadership and knowledge and experience and things like that. And as a result, each of these grades, because it's the government, has a pay band associated with it. So if you're GS 14, you make X amount of money. If you're GS 5, you make less money. And it's summed up by these point methods, where they identify what factors of the job are compensable. In other words, what factors of the job are worth money. Then you have SMEs, subject matter experts, review each job and assign points for these factors. You sum up the points and you plot salaries against it. So it's used to set salaries. This is hard a lot of the time. In organizations, there's always debate over who's overpaid, who's underpaid. There's the gender wage gap. There's all these things. Job evaluation is a way to try to make that process a little bit more fair. So what are the downsides of job analysis? What are some things that could go wrong? Well, there's social and cognitive sources of bias. Remember, if we're talking to subject matter experts, especially, we're talking to people, and people make mistakes. People are fallible. People sometimes are influenced socially. There could be conformity to say that something is important to the job when it's not, or vice versa. So let's say you're talking to a bunch of factory workers and there's a part of their job that's really, really easy to do. They might pressure each other to say that it's really important. That way it doesn't make their lives harder. On the other hand, people could maybe neglect to mention something in the job description if it's very difficult or dangerous in hopes that it's left off. And this is sort of peer pressure to game the job analysis. You could have extremity shifts. So picture this, you're sitting in a room with some SMEs and they're saying, oh, it's really important for us to do X. And then the person next to them is like, oh yeah, that is super important. And then everyone is like, oh yeah, definitely that, got to do that. Extremity. So this is kind of stolen from social psych. And then motivation loss. If you're interviewing SMEs, you're taking them away from their job, they might not want to be there, and they might be giving you answers just to get you out of there. That's definitely a challenge. We can also have self-presentation issues. So people want to make their jobs seem more or less important than they are, oftentimes more. So if you go talk to someone doing a low-level job, sometimes you get people saying, yeah, like, I know it doesn't look like much, but man, I really keep things running around here. If it wasn't for me, everything would go straight to hell. Maybe kind of true, but it definitely skews the job analysis. Sometimes there's social desirability where people want to respond one way to look better or more appropriate. And then you can have demand effects, right? Where if I'm coming in to do a job analysis, somebody might tell me what they think I want to hear rather than what they actually do. So all these sort of social psych things come into play here. There's also these cognitive issues. Sometimes it's just too much information. People do so many things in their job, they can't break it down. Sometimes they use heuristics or shortcuts to explain things, so the information isn't conveyed fully. And sometimes they categorize things in ways that are unhelpful. Finally, we have extraneous information. You know, somebody telling me about all the stuff that's not part of their job that they do anyway, not super helpful. Carelessness, they leave a bunch of stuff out. Not telling me enough information, presenting the order. And the other one is halo error. And this is important, where somebody might spend very little of their time doing one thing that's very important, and that thing overshadows their impression of their job. And they could give that information as the most important, time-consuming thing, even when it may not be. So those are some of the small grab bag things. Going forward, we keep trying to improve accuracy. We keep trying to train raters and SMEs to do job analyses more accurately. And I think, you know, the biggest challenge, it's actually not on here, that we face is as work goes increasingly remote, how do we do job analysis when we're not there, if we're doing job analysis remotely? And the big question is, how are jobs going to change in the next 10 or 15 years? We're going to, on the plus side, IO psychologists will be in demand because these jobs will change and we will have to do more job analyses. So with that all said, I know that was a lot. I apologize. That's just sort of what we got to do for this class. But job analysis is the foundation for a lot of things we do. Personnel selection and performance appraisal we'll talk about in the next few days. It's a way to get either tasks or knowledge, skills, ability, and others of the job. It's a way to describe the job. We need to describe the job in order to understand it, in order to do all these other things. We talked about purposes of the job. So be able to perhaps list those out or identify what those are. And then we talked about methods of job analysis, task or work and worker-oriented, interviewing SMEs, coming in as a trained job analyst, etc. And finally, we ended with job evaluation and biases in job analyses. So, to be honest, I think this is maybe one of the more boring lectures that you'll get all semester. It's just one of those things that people don't often think about doing job analyses, and it's so fundamental that I wanted to start with this before we launch into other topics. So that's the video for today. Stay tuned for more, folks. Thank you. Bye-bye.